Hello and welcome to Newsweek South Asia, your one-stop destination for in-depth analysis of security challenges, regional conflicts and the evolving threat of terrorism. Let's take a look at the headlines first. India slams Pakistan at NWSA as a country that bombs its own people, sanctioned mass rape. POJK protests force Islamabad into face-saving deal amid mounting unrest. And Bangladesh interim regime faces global condemnation for widespread human rights violations. At the UN Security Council, Pakistan resorted to baseless rhetoric against India, accusing it of silencing Kashmiri women. India strongly rebutted, calling Islamabad's claims a delusional tirade and highlighting Pakistan's own dark record. From the 1971 genocidal campaign in erstwhile East Pakistan to ongoing abductions, forced conversions and sexual violence against minority women. India contrasted this with its consistent efforts to uphold women's rights and gender justice, exposing Pakistan's hypocrisy on the global stage.
The UN convened a debate to mark 25 years of Resolution 1325, the bedrock of the women, peace and security agenda aimed at protecting women in conflict, integrating them into peace processes and preventing gender-based violence. Seizing this moment, Pakistan's envoy Saima Salim placed Kashmir center stage, accusing India of silencing Kashmiri women, deploying sexual violence as a weapon and erasing their stories from UN reports. In response, India's permanent representative to the UN, Ambassador Parvathaneni Harish, delivered a sharp, historically grounded rebuttal. He dismissed Islamabad's speech as a delusional tirade and challenged Pakistan to explain its own dark past before lecturing India. Harish reminded the Council that Pakistan's military has itself committed some of the worst violations in South Asia's history, particularly during Operation Searchlight when the Pakistani army launched a brutal crackdown in East Pakistan in 1971. He juxtaposed Pakistan's selective outrage over Kashmir against its refusal to reckon with its own record of mass violence, forced displacement and impunity.
Every year we are unfortunately fated to listen to the delusional tirade of Pakistan against my country, especially on Jammu and Kashmir, the Indian territory they covet. Our pioneering record on women, peace and security agenda is unblemished and unscathed. A country that bombs its own people, conducts systematic genocide, can only attempt to distract the world with misdirection and hyperbole.
Launched on March 25, 1971, Operation Searchlight was Pakistan's military campaign to suppress the East Pakistan independence movement. Over the course of the conflict, sexual violence was pervasive, with many historians and activists putting the range of women raped between 2 lakh and 4 lakh. Survivors and historical investigations note that these rapes were not only opportunistic but often systematic, deployed as a campaign to terrorize, humiliate and destabilize communities.
This is a country that conducted Operation Searchlight in 1971 and sanctioned a systematic campaign of genocidal mass rape of 400,000 women citizens by its own army. The world sees through Pakistan's propaganda.
Pakistan's shameful legacy did not end in 1971. It continues in the form of abductions, forced conversions, child marriages and sexual violence against minority women, particularly Hindus and Christians in Sindh and Punjab. According to a 2024 report by the Sustainable Social Development Organization, Pakistan recorded 24,000 cases of abductions, 5,000 cases of rape and 500 so-called dishonor killings last year alone. Hindu minor girls remain the most vulnerable, often kidnapped, forcibly married to their abductors and converted against their will, crimes that Pakistan's judiciary routinely validates instead of punishing. In the recent past, Indian diplomat at the UN, Eldos Matthew Punus, delivered a scathing rebuttal reminding Islamabad of its shameful past and its ongoing abuse of women and minorities.
rampant abduction, trafficking, child early and forced marriages and domestic servitude, sexual violence and forced religious conversions of thousands of vulnerable women and girls as weapons of persecution towards religious and ethnic minority communities are reported and chronicled, including in the recent OHCHR reports. These reports highlight that the vile acts by Pakistan are also validated by its judiciary. It is ironical that those who perpetrate these crimes are now masquerading as champions of justice. The duplicity and hypocrisy is self-evident.
This was not merely a symbolic gesture, but
India, by contrast, has steadily sought to use its UN presence and peacekeeping missions to champion gender inclusion and women's legacy. In 2007, India deployed the first ever all-female formed police unit to the UN mission in Liberia. More recently, India has committed to deploying women in its peacekeeping contingents training courses, for example, UNWMOC 2025 and engagement platoons in conflict zones such as Abyei.
President, as we look ahead, India remains unwavering in its commitment to the women, peace and security agenda. We stand ready to share our expertise with partners, particularly those in the Global South, fostering collective solutions to share challenges.
While Islamabad clings to denial and doublespeak, New Delhi's record demonstrates accountability, protection and action, values Pakistan has failed to uphold.
Pakistan's facade of peace and progress in Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir has once again crumbled. Violent protests that rocked the region for several days have exposed Islamabad's systematic neglect and exploitative policies. The Shehbaz Sharif-led government was forced to sign a face-saving deal with the demonstrators after the deaths of at least a dozen people and hundreds injured. What Pakistan is calling a victory for peace is in reality a clear defeat of its coercive rule. Report.
After days of violent protests that left Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir in turmoil, Pakistan's federal government capitulated, signing a 25-point agreement with the Jammu Kashmir Joint Awami Action Committee to end the unrest. Parliamentary Affairs Minister Tariq Fazal Chaudhry hailed it as a peaceful victory, though few in the region share that sentiment. The deal includes compensation and jobs for the families of victims, a 10 billion rupees plan to upgrade POJK's power system, land regularization in Mangla Dam areas, and the rollout of health cards. A judicial probe has also been promised to investigate the violence, and the government has agreed to release all arrested protesters. But beneath the veneer of reconciliation lies growing resentment. The unrest began on September 29, 2025 after talks collapsed between local authorities and leaders of the Jammu Kashmir Joint Awami Action Committee or JKJAAC, a coalition of traders and civil rights groups. But when Islamabad dismissed their appeals, thousands took to the streets in one of the biggest protests POJK has seen in recent years. What began as a peaceful strike soon turned violent after police resorted to brutal force. At least 10 civilians, including 3 police personnel, were killed in the clashes. Hundreds more were injured as the administration used heavy crackdowns to silence public anger. Internet and mobile services were shut down, cutting the region off from the world and families abroad. On the sidelines of the ongoing UN Human Rights Council session in Geneva, leaders of the United Kashmir People's National Party denounced Islamabad's repression and urged global attention to the crisis in POJK.
The people have realized that they are not ready to live with Pakistan, and the major aspiration and vision will of the people in all these regions are to reunite with the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir. So because of this notion, Pakistan is trying to use force in order to silence the people, but people are not ready to be silenced. And now you can see the internet and mobile phones have been blocked. and there is no connection between the international diaspora community with their families, so they disconnect everything and put the entire population behind the Iron Curtain and trying to meet with the fist of force.
This isn't the first time such anger has erupted. Just last year, 4 people were killed during similar demonstrations, prompting the Sharif government to hastily approve a 24 billion rupee relief grant. The promises included subsidies on flour and electricity, but like every other pledge made by Islamabad, implementations never came. This persistent neglect has fueled deep resentment. People accuse the so-called puppet government in Muzaffarabad of being nothing more than Islamabad's rubber stamp, serving elites rather than citizens. At Geneva, UK PNP chairman Shaukat Ali Kashmiri also exposed the double standards of Islamabad's so-called democratic setup, accusing the puppet government in Muzaffarabad of serving Pakistan's elite interest instead of its citizens.
The constitution of Pakistan is declaring its own territory, Pakistan territory, and POJK and Gilgit-Baltistan is not part and parcel of the Pakistan, but through four land officers which came from the Punjab is rare ruler of this area. And now it is the people, it is the civil society who are asking that restore our basic human rights. They are not asking for the ruling. They are just they are asking, protect our natural resources. Do not, you have no right to plunder our natural resources. But unfortunately, Pakistan is not ready.
While Islamabad boasts of peace deals, the ground reality paints a grim picture. The repression in POJK continues under surveillance, censorship, and enforced silence. The ongoing demonstrations have become a powerful symbol of defiance against decades of injustice.
More than 2.5 years, people are on the streets and they are demanding for their basic fundamental human rights. And Pakistan is not ready to listen their voices. They are peacefully protesting. They didn't take guns. They are non-violent. This is the beauty of that movement. People's Rights Movement under the banner of Awami Action Committee. And we are standing by them, and at international level, we are their voice because they don't have any representation anywhere. And from 29th September, and whole area is locked down.
With the agreement bringing a temporary calm to the streets, questions remain over whether Islamabad's promises will translate into real change for the people of Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Even as protests subside, voices of dissent continue to echo beyond borders. At the ongoing UN Human Rights Council session in Geneva, exiled leaders have urged the global community to hold Pakistan accountable for its rights abuses and systematic neglect in POJK. Observers warn that without genuine political reforms and respect for local aspirations, Pakistan risks yet another cycle of unrest in the already fragile region.
Changes its mind and recognizes.
Bangladesh's interim regime, led by Chief Advisor Mohammad Yunus, is under mounting global scrutiny for widespread human rights violations. The country has witnessed an alarming surge in political persecution, mob violence, and attacks on minorities. At a side event during the 60th session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, activists and experts from South Asia and Europe voiced deep concern, warning that Bangladesh's democracy and secular identity are being systematically dismantled. They say what began as a promise of reform has turned into a reign of fear, censorship, and bloodshed. The event, organized by the Center for Gender Justice and titled Violations of Fundamental Human Rights, Rule of Law and Democracy in Bangladesh, screened a short film documenting extrajudicial killings, mob lynchings, attacks on religious minorities, and destruction of temples and churches. Panelists said the attacks also targeted journalists and media outlets critical of the interim government. Speakers pointed to the political aftermath of the August 5, 2024 ouster of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. They said that the vacuum has emboldened radical elements while the interim regime has moved to crush dissent, filling hundreds of thousands of cases, imprisoning opponents, and creating an environment where free and fair elections are impossible.
There is an estimation of 15 million internally displaced people that are just running away for not being murdered, for not being imprisoned, for not being falsely accused of whatever, because there are 50,000 fake accusations made on journalists, on professors, on politicians, most of them absolutely absurd, anonymous, or made by people that have nothing to do with whatever. The situation, in my opinion, is the most serious all over the world. Of course, you have violence in many places, you do, but in such a scale, in a country that has 200 million people and geared at destroying the acts of foundation of the country, because the people in charge, namely the Jamaat-e-Islami, are very clear. They want to destroy 71. They want to destroy the independent Bangladesh. That's their aim, and that's what is at stake.
Panelists described an apparently coordinated campaign of repression, mass arrests, a spike in disappearances, and a flood of politically motivated cases allegedly aimed at decimating the Awami League and other popular parties. Observers warn that the result is not reform, but the dismantling of the democratic foundations of independent Bangladesh.
A human rights violation in Bangladesh at its highest level in last 54 years. All sort of population, it's not only the minorities, they are tortured, no doubt about that. Even the Ahmadiyya people are getting tortured. Hindu, Muslim, Christian, nobody is spared over the last 14 months. As you know that more than 2,500 cases has been documented of torture. About more than 30 people has been killed, minorities. And as one of the report from Global Center for Democratic Governance, they said that at least 637 people were killed by mob lynching. So this is the scenario. Hundreds and thousands of houses have been set, burned, looted, vandalized. At the moment, they are trying to do a fraud election, comprises of few parties and banning other popular parties. So Bangladesh needs to get back democracy, rule of law and justice. That's what we are fighting for.
Experts at the Geneva session also flagged the resurgence of extremist groups. They said the interim government's failure to curtail radical networks, coupled with repression of mainstream parties, has created a toxic blend of insecurity and polarization, with potentially severe regional consequences.
I think a lot of people in Bangladesh are quite fearful. I think if Mohammed Yunus had came in, made some small reforms, but then moved towards the election, I think people would have been a lot more content. However, I think what they've seen is Yunus and the students have wanted to vandalize Bangladesh's foundations, and it has caused atomization in society, and people are anxious about it. But then you've got, on the other hand, there's these other radicals out there, the radical Islamists from Jamaat-e-Islami. I mean, like just the other day, their deputy said he wanted to have a war with India, and creating a massive cadre of more jihadis to have a war. Like, this is just crazy talk. These guys could literally be creating the next government in Bangladesh. And I think people who are in the centre, even people who don't even like the Awami League, are quite fearful, and I think it's an absolute shame for Bangladesh.
Panelists provided grim tallies: hundreds killed in lynchings, mass displacement, churches and temples attacked, and historic liberation war sites vandalized. Evidence, they said, of systematic attempts to erase pluralism and the nation's secular founding memory. Political observers argue that the Yunus-led interim regime has lost all legitimacy, relying on coercion, fabricated cases, and radical networks to maintain control. Bangladesh's democratic institutions stand hollowed out, while growing international concern is now pushing for UN-led investigations into rights abuses and electoral manipulation. India too has voiced alarm over the deteriorating situation in its eastern neighbour, reporting over 2,300 attacks on minorities since August 2024. Regional analysts warn that the continued instability in Bangladesh could have serious cross-border security implications, potentially fueling extremism and migration flows. Speakers in Geneva urged urgent international action, independent investigations, targeted accountability measures, and stronger diplomatic pressure to restore democratic processes and protect vulnerable communities in Bangladesh. As criticism of the Yunus interim administration grows louder, the question for the region is whether global institutions will move beyond words and demand concrete steps to halt the slide into repression. After plunging Afghanistan into total digital darkness for nearly 2 days in late September, the Taliban has now restored internet and mobile services, but under heavy surveillance and censorship. As of this week, Afghans report that the regime has imposed new filters on social media platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, and X, leaving millions unable to freely communicate or access information. What began as a so-called morality-driven blackout has now evolved into a state-controlled digital stranglehold, yet another sign of the Taliban's deepening repression.
The Taliban's latest assault on digital freedom began in mid-September, when authorities abruptly cut fiber optic internet in 5 northern provinces: Kunduz, Badakhshan, Baglan, Takhar and Balkh, claiming the move was to prevent immoral activities online. The restrictions quickly escalated into a nationwide internet and telecommunications shutdown that lasted nearly 48 hours toward the end of September, cutting millions of Afghans off from the outside world. The blackout crippled daily life across Afghanistan, disrupting government operations, banking services, education, and humanitarian coordination. Flights were delayed, aid efforts were paralyzed, and families were left without any means of communication. Residents described how the sudden blackout paralyzed essential services and education in an already struggling country.
قطع اینترنت خانه به خانه تأثیر منفی در تمام بخش‌های زندگی می داشته باشه. بخش عمده‌ای از خدمات ملکی مانند توزیع تذکره، پاسپورت، سیستم بانکداری با اینترنت ارتباط داره. امروز روند آموزشی همگان به ویژه افراد دارای معلولیت مخصوصا نابینان ارتباط نزدیک با اینترنت داره. کتابخانه‌های آنلاین در شفاخانه، بخش خدمات درمانی آنلاین، تجارت آنلاین که اخیراً معینیت امور جوانان و وزارت اطلاعات و فرهنگ آغاز کرده بود.
NetBlocks, an international internet monitoring organization, confirmed that connectivity in Afghanistan dropped to nearly 1% during the shutdown, calling it a total blackout implemented under the Taliban's so-called morality measures. As digital communication collapsed, panic spread among Afghans both inside and outside the country. Thousands in Europe and elsewhere said they were unable to reach their families for days, a haunting reminder of the Taliban's power to silence a nation with a single decree.
Last Monday from 5 o'clock, the internet was everything is closed. No one have contact with the family. There's a big happen. No one don't know about the family. It's closed, What happened is there. We don't know nothing.
While services were gradually restored on October 1st, the Taliban has since introduced new digital restrictions. As of October 9, users across Afghanistan report that major social media platforms including Facebook, Instagram and X are now heavily filtered or completely inaccessible. Pages take minutes to load, videos fail to play, and messaging apps are frequently disrupted. Rights organizations fear the new filters are part of a broader censorship system modeled after authoritarian regimes that monitor and control citizens' online activity. For many Afghans, especially women and young students, the internet was a final refuge in a country where nearly every other freedom has been erased. Since taking power in August 2021, the Taliban has systematically erased women from public life, silenced journalists, banned education for girls, and criminalized dissent. The latest internet restrictions are yet another layer of control, a calculated attempt to disconnect Afghans from the world and from each other. In today's Afghanistan, silence is not just enforced in classrooms and offices. It now extends to every phone, every screen, and every voice that dares to speak.
And with that, we come to the end of this edition of Newsweek South Asia. We'll be back next week with more news, views, and analysis from the subcontinent. Meanwhile, do keep writing to us at nwsa@anin.com. This is Shivangi Mishra signing off on behalf of the entire team of Newsweek South Asia. Goodbye and take care.